Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome back to another episode of ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. It's me, Tigre Gardenia, and have I got a fantastic episode for you. This episode was just so much fun to record because my guest was just so interesting. Her name is Anne Riley, and she was born in Richland, Washington, the 11th of 12 children. Can you believe that? Can you believe what it would be like to be the 11th of 12 children? She actually grew up in Illinois, so she has a little bit of that East Coast, West Coast thing, which is, I think, why we get along so well, because I've also got the East Coast. I'm the opposite, born East Coast, then lived in the West Coast, back and forth. So she graduated from Illinois State University in 1981 with a degree in accounting, earning the prestigious Bone Scholar Award. So she actually married her high school sweetheart. She moved to the West Coast, started a family, and worked in all of that like basic stuff like accounting because, she has an MBA, of course. But after she retired, though, she influenced by Michael Rothschild's Bionomics, economics as an ecosystem, which we're going to talk about in the interview. Riley developed a theory known as the idea sphere, exploring the parallels between human and ecological systems. Her theory is articulated in her novel Dina, Nature's Case for Democracy, and a forthcoming, which is the book we talk about here, nonfiction book, The Human Idea, Nature's Newest Ecosystem. Look, Riley is fun. She's funny. She's interesting. She's captivating. This is an amazing interview. You are really going to love this conversation. So I will leave you now to episode 79, How Brains, and probably why brains, but how brains limit us. Welcome to ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. I'm your host, Tigrila Gardenia, nature-inspired mentor and leadership coach. In this podcast, I share ancient and modern knowledge from biology to spirituality about the wondrous ways in which plants can help you lead a naturally conscious life. Hello, hello. Oh, I am so excited about this discussion we're going to have.
Hello, and thank you for having me. I am also excited. I'm glad we talked earlier a little bit, just to chat because it gave me so many new ideas to think about. So
And
thank
isn't
you.
ideas actually what we're going to be talking about? But before you
Yes,
go
it
there,
is.
I would love for you, Anne, to tell people who is Anne and how does Anne come to this entire conversation that we're about to
Okay. I will do that. I hate to usually do this, but I
have.
will. My name is Anne Riley. Am I will tell you first of all, I'm not a scientist, but I like to think. And when I was 10 years old, I was in Catholic school and learned about evolution. Surprise enough as it is, but this was the early, 60s where they taught education. But I learned about evolution, and I couldn't quite figure out how humans and evolution work together. And I've been on a hunt ever since I was 10 years old to figure this out. And it was like, oh, on the top of my mind, but it was just always underneath. And every time I would read something, I would sort of put it into one or two buckets. One was that makes sense, and I can keep that idea. And this doesn't make sense. I can throw that idea out. And I went through all my life like this. I majored in business in college. I majored in accounting, and I minored in economics, where I learned about profit maximization. And I was like, this doesn't I know this is how everybody works, is that they maximize profit, but this doesn't seem like it fits in the whole scheme of things. And I didn't quite understand why, but that was sort of in that uh-oh bucket. And then I read a book. I did a lot of reading. I read Charles Darwin's Origin of Species, which is amazing, and his Voyage of the Beagle, which I think is even more amazing because he was such a young man, and he was just observing the world as he went around the world on the Beagle, and learned, I mean, just put together the idea of evolution by his sheer ability to think. And I was like, whoa, that's pretty amazing. But I read a book called Bionomics, by a fellow named Michael Rothschild, and he proposed that economic systems really work like natural systems. And I just was amazed by this book. I think it was the first time anybody had tried to put put together nature and humans since social Darwinism. I think that had been a just kind of a you can't do that, very taboo. But he did it, and it made so much sense. But at the end, he said, but we always have to compete. And I was like, wait, 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 wait. You told us about all kinds of other things. And then you came up with this conclusion. So even though I loved all his ideas, I didn't agree with the conclusion. But that kept me, that was like 30 years ago. I read this book, and that was just underneath. So I kept reading and reading and reading. And of course, raised children and went to work and everything. And then during COVID, I was like, I got some time. Actually, in 2018, I worked on a political campaign where all of these major figures in politics came in to support my candidate, and I was like, why is that so important? Why is it? And what I realized is that government is our coordinating system, and who controls the government controls how we live together. And I was like, oh, I get it. And that just seemed to open up the floodworks for me. And I kind of then was able to put together this theory about how we have built, from using ideas, we've built our own ecosystem of ideas. But because we do so, um, we've broken the rules that animals and plants have used for billions of years to survive. And so I look through how we've broken those rules and how we can revise those rules to be true to our human nature, which is to choose and think, but also create coordination mechanisms and collaboration mechanisms that will benefit ourselves and our planet. So that's the basic.
I love this conversation because we're going to have so much fun, because I think oftentimes when you start working with plants and even animals, let's just take for a second, let's move the human a little bit out of it. It's easy
Mhm.
for us to sort of say, well, they're all better than us, period, like with a period at the end of it.
Mhm.
And I think what I
Mhm.
really like about what the work that you're doing, and as I was doing some research and going into it, is that you're saying, look, plants especially have this innate ability that comes from the way that plants have evolved that gives them a leg
Mhm.
up on some of these
Mhm.
things. But you also don't
Mhm.
shy away from the fact that we're still human, though. And that means that
Mhm.
we have to put it into a human context. We have to take the
Right.
best of that and work with
Right.
it rather than,
Right.
and so it's both a way for us to see some of our limitations that are not
Mhm.
limitations biologically speaking. There are limitations
Mhm.
societally speaking or culturally speaking that we have created. You know, the famous
Right.
conditioning that I talk about all the time
Exactly.
that have limited.
Right.
It's almost as if we've put our beautiful brains that we think of as what makes us so advanced. I heard somebody say to me I
Mhm.
heard somebody say on an interview the other day that it's like they were just saying, because we're the most advanced, another one of those humans. It's like, we're the most advanced species because we're the ones that can do this. And I'm like, honey, we're not the only ones that can do that. Like, we're
Yeah.
not the only ones that have doctors. We're not the only ones that have, builders. We're not the only ones that have
Mhm.
complex societies. We're just the ones that make it showy. Like, it's not the same thing.
Yes. Well, that's exactly right, because the real difference is that plants and animals have only their bodies as tools. They can only do things with their bodies, and some animals are advanced, like birds can build nests and wasps can build these very intricate hives, and so can bees. They make the honey. The honeycombs are just kind of amazing when you look at it. But what's different about humans is, to the degree that they do these things, we can actually take our ideas and build something from the resources around us. And like for instance, I can write a book, and then those ideas that I espouse are then stored in that book, and they then can live as their own thing. That book can live as its own thing outside of me. I could die tomorrow, but the book is still there, and people can learn it. And which is a perfect example. I read Charles Darwin's Origin of Species. He died in
Mm.
1882, but I can read it today, and those ideas can then live forward. So it's a matter of degree. It's not advanced or not advanced, it's different. And the problem with our ideas is we break the rules that animals have very, have made. Like a nest won't wreck the environment, but a nuclear power plant might.
Right.
you know, and that's the difference, that I would say humans have done these things pell mell without really understanding the consequences
Well,
of
and I
them.
would also say that going back to your book example, which I think is a great one, and it kind of had me thinking as I was listening to you about the perspective that we think of a book as advanced because it holds, this knowledge, and then that knowledge, like you said, can be picked up. But I also wonder if in going in that direction, if you think about before the printing press, which we of course think of as a revolutionary
Mhm,
idea,
mhm,
but before the printing press, human beings passed a lot of information verbally. And for example,
mhm,
I'm a Kabbalist, and from a Kabbalah perspective, was always originally passed orally. And the
mhm,
reason for the oral tradition wasn't the kind of Catholics take on to, only give it to certain people. It was different. It was because they wanted to ensure that every time it was passed on, it was put into a modern context. So therefore, it could
mm,
always be understood in the modern context. And my
right.
question that sometimes I wonder is, have we taken things that we think are advanced, and going back to this whole
Mhm,
thing of conditioning, and distorted them and not realized that they are also what's hurting us? I'm not saying we should get rid of books. I love my books. Don't get rid of
mhm.
my books. I love my books. But
Right,
a
right, 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 right,
book, and we've seen this with the Bible, and we've seen it with a lot of other books, even magic books, like all kinds of books. A book doesn't always give you the right context, and it can't
right,
be updated necessarily to a certain extent. Even some
right.
of Darwin's ideas are already,
Mhm,
we've passed the level of evolution. Some of it is still as important and relevant
mhm,
today as when Darwin first discovered them. But there are some things that
right,
Darwin talks about in the book that Darwin himself can't go back and say, "Hey guys, by the way, this part, you've all gone way advanced for me. So 86 those
exactly.
pieces." And
Yeah,
and
exactly.
because there wasn't an oral tradition attached to it, because we put them in the book and we think that's enough, I wonder if that's
Mhm.
another thing that is like that double-edged sword, that it inhibits us just as much as it enhances us.
Right, right. Oh God, you gave me so many things to think about there. So, I think again, it's not just books, but
Right.
everything, a building, a spaceship, everything that you create outside of a body holds the ideas that then can be used by other people to change them. So, um, i- it's it's always going to be an imperfect tool.
And I
And
think that
and
recognizing that is the first step. I think we don't recognize that
right,
anymore.
right. Well, and what we should understand about people is that when we have ideas, ideas don't have any physical nature until we make
Right.
something, right? You write a Bible and then it has a physical nature, but before that, an idea is just an idea. And people can accept a good idea or a bad idea, a true idea or a false idea. In nature, only good ideas and true ideas exist, right? If you go against the environment in which you live, you're not going to last and your DNA won't last to pass on. But we can do this all the time. We create all kinds of ideas that are not necessarily good or true or helpful. War is a perfect example. War is an idea that some other group is different or has stuff you want or is um, inferior, and then we decide that we are justified in going and conquering them. That's an idea, and it's not necessarily a good
Right.
one, right? Nature doesn't work that way. They do compete, but they compete for food to live, and they don't go anywhere else besides that, because they want to live. That's their kind of program to live. But humans can accept a bad idea and carry that idea for years and years and years and years. Look at religions. I would say there are so many religions and they're all the right one, right? But they can't all be the right one. But people accept them as the right one. So something in there is false. I'm not going to just tell you which one is true or which one is false, but the fact that there are so many claiming to be the true one shows me that that's an idea that's accepted without being true.
Yeah, and I think that this is exactly going, kind of getting into the heart of your theories, and I think why they're so fascinating, and why we ended up having this conversation is this idea. I already kind of gave it away in the
Yeah.
thing, but the fact that we generate ideas as humans,
Uh-huh.
and
Hmm.
those ideas, like you said, in the natural world, the idea is constantly being tested. So
Oh,
and there's
constantly.
no how do I say this? There is no set, like any plant that you watch, that a plant might repeat an idea over and over again, right? This is something that
Hmm.
works, and I'm working. Then the moment
Hmm.
it doesn't, but it's always a test. Even when it's working, it's
Hmm.
always a test.
Sure.
So therefore,
Right.
when it
Right.
doesn't work, the plant doesn't hold on and like stubbornly keep doing that same thing. The plant then says, "Oh wait, this isn't working now. Okay, let me try something else." Right? So I keep
Hmm.
working it up until it doesn't work. Then I try something else. And I think
Hmm.
that from a human perspective, we generate, an idea, and then we try it and it works, and then it becomes set in stone. And our
Mm.
conditioning
Yeah.
then says we continue to use that idea in the same way. And when it stops working,
Hmm.
we don't think it's the idea that's wrong. We think something else is wrong. And we blame
Right.
something else. And so therefore, we
Hmm.
still keep trying to perpetuate, like you said, this wrong idea for that context, right? Because it's always a
Right.
combination
Right.
of it could even be a great idea in a different context. And so this is what
Right.
we see
Right.
this is what we see very differently in the animals and the plants, because we see that fact that there is no such thing as set in stone. It's always
Right.
changeable based on the conditions. It's always about being
Right.
locally
Hmm.
attuned. In biomimicry, we
Right.
talk about this a lot, these life's principles. And one of the major life
Hmm.
principles is adapt to the ever changing conditions. And we as
Right.
human
Right.
beings don't. And so I think that your theory is really interesting, because you're not saying humans don't have good ideas. You're saying that it's almost like we're using the ideas wrong. And so therefore, we're no longer generating true ideas. We're just
Mm.
rechurning what we think we already know, using what we
Right.
already know to it. But
Right.
I'd love for
Right.
you to go a little deeper, because I know you have a new book coming out. And so I'd love for you to
Hmm.
really kind of go into a little bit more, kind of give us a more complete framework of what is your premise? Like, what is the premise of the book?
Okay. The premise of the book is that humans have created their own ecosystem based on ideas. It is structured the same way. At the core of life is DNA, and from DNA you go through this you get a genome, and you get a cell, and you get a tissue, and then you get a body. Right? Those are things. We have ideas that work exactly the same way with that exactly same expanding structure, but it's based on ideas which can't really be seen. But the ideas are held in a mind, the mind is held in a body, bodies work together to create institutions, and bodies also work together to create societies. So we can look at that similar structure and look at the tools that nature uses and see how they work when we apply them to humans. And because we've looked around and said, oh, well, we see animals competing, so we say we must compete. Well, and like to your point about Darwin, he didn't really get the whole idea of cells. He didn't see that there were cells collaborating underneath, and that he missed the whole collaboration
Right.
part. And and that's something that we've filled in those gaps. But so the idea is that we humans came along and we have this ability to think. And when we are born, we have no ideas. And over time, people throw ideas into our head, and those become our base of knowledge by which we compete and collaborate in the world. And it is by necessity an incomplete set. Each of us has an incomplete set of
Right.
knowledge. And so do animals, but they have a complete set for their survival. We don't. We have a incomplete set, and we have to figure out how to get as much stuff in there so that we can figure out how to survive using our brains, because that's our big skill. And so what I talk about is how humans have sort of messed up, using like our government and our institutions, how they don't quite fit the way animals work in the ecosystem. And if we actually use their tools and adjusted some of our behaviors, we would have a much better society. So I spend the last part of the book saying, for instance, um, one of the things that every cell in the body does is send up a report, necessarily, an electronic report, to the brain to say, hey, I'm doing fine, or I need help. I scratched my person here scratched their arm and now I've got blood all over. What do I do? And they send this report up, and they can't discern. They just send a report up periodically that says where they are, and then the brain goes, oh, I got to send some guys out to help you. And if you're fine, the brain says, I'm not going to do anything about you, you're fine. But we don't do that kind of disclosure. We have all kinds of problems. Like, for instance, I use in my book the example of water pollution. What we do is that we have a government that says, here's our rules, and all you guys follow the rules. And then the guys go around and say, how do I hide from that and keep polluting, because it's so much cheaper to do that. And then so they're running around and hiding everything and lying to the government and doing all this, and then the government has to send out this, it's people that look at them and do all this stuff. That is not how nature would
Yeah.
work. If nature would do it, nature would say, hey, everybody, companies of a certain size, send up a report that tells me what you're polluting and where it's going, and how much it is. And then what we're going to do is send back people to help you. We're going to figure out, but without that knowledge, we don't know who to help, right? So we send it back and we say, we're not going to go after you. We're going to help you fix the problem. What happens out of that is these guys, nobody's wasting resources on running after people and putting them in jail. We're basically sending our resources to finding the problem, fixing the problem, and then the company becomes a good citizen and they have clean water, and the government's like, okay, good, keep sending up your reports so we can keep track of this, and we'll go to the next guy. So if a society worked the way a body did, we would make very different
Right.
decisions. We would use disclosure as a tool and figure out where our problems are and then go solve the problems. We have a very adversarial relationship with everybody. Governments versus business is, well, we're all people. And if and animals wouldn't do that, because they would all live shorter lives and probably die
Right.
young, so they wouldn't do it that way. And that's what I'm trying to advocate, is that to learn how these things work, adjust it for human thinking and human behavior and humans' ability to think and choose, and then respond and run our governments and run our institutions in a different way.
Yeah, and this is, very connected to a lot of the work that, for example, I did when I was working on social biomimicry projects, because it's about looking
Mm,
at social structures and with a different perspective. Because it seems like somewhere along the lines, as brains developed, as the
mhm,
brain started to develop, we can see the differences even between, primates and ourselves. Because primates,
mhm,
yes, they have an individuality. Yes, they still have a society, but that has,
mhm,
some aspects that kind of mirror us. But the independence of the individual sort of still reaches a point where it says, okay, this is the confine of it, right? After this,
mhm,
your individuality doesn't really fit what our
mhm,
ecosystem needs. And so, therefore,
mhm.
stop it, stop what you're doing,
Right,
or we're going to help
right.
you. Like you said,
Mhm,
this behavior is
mhm,
not conducive to the overall system that we have.
mhm.
So
Right.
I'm curious as to what it was that developed in human minds and brains, human brains in
Mhm,
particular. And I'm curious as if you have any kind of theories that you think, as you looked in your research, as you started to study, plant behavior and
mhm,
animal behavior,
mhm,
and you start to then look at human behavior, especially from a societal perspective, which is what we're talking about,
mhm.
right? As you look at it from that perspective, what do you think developed? What are some of the key characteristics that you think developed in humans that went kind of in the wrong direction, that are part of what causes our issues?
Mm. It's a very good question, and I don't know the
Hmm.
answer, but I surmise that what's really happening is that evolution is always pushing towards bigger brain size and bigger ability to, because brains equal coordination, and the more coordination you have, the body works better as a unit, right?
Is
That's
that really
I mean, okay,
true? I mean, if you
well,
could,
this is what I'm
I-
saying. This is where the
if
evolution
if
is
you
going.
compare it to a
So
plant, there's no more
mm,
better coordination of a system than a plant, and there's no brain
absolutely.
in there.
Absolutely.
I don't know. I
You're
think
right. But
scientists are
what I'm
bullshitting on that one.
okay,
But
fair
I
enough.
get your point.
But the brain is still advancing in size
Mhm.
and ability to do a different thing. And or to it's evolving along a continuum that's enabled it to create abstract thought, to create an idea from a physical thing. All those synapses working together have created a physical
Right.
idea. I am cold today. I want to go on a walk today. Those are ideas that don't that I can conjure up in my brain. And a plant, for its neural system, that you're right, is very flexible and very intuitive to living on the earth, can't say, I'm going on a walk today. It's not it because its neural system, every neural system survives and fits within the environment it can do. And neural systems are really expensive. They take energy and they don't provide any useful work other than coordination. So, for instance, my heart pumps blood, my kidneys excrete waste, but my brain doesn't do any of those things. It just coordinates. So, you can only have as big a brain as your environment allows you to do. And plants are so good at surviving with the world around them, they don't need a big brain and they don't have one. And each animal as part of evolution, there are, again, more plants than there will ever be people or animals. But a small portion has developed these bigger and bigger and bigger brains. And out of that has come the humans who can create this abstract thought and create things with their bodies outside. They can use their hands and they can use their brains and they can use the resources and create something outside their body. Now, other animals have big brains. Dolphins have really big brains. Whales have really big brains. Octopi have really big brains, but they haven't yet gone on the path where they've been able to manipulate the world the way humans can. I think they still manipulate, the world in their own way. Humans are just a very big outlier in how markedly they can change their environment, and they can think. Like I said, they've changed the rule that they don't have to accept. They can accept a bad idea and kill all their neighbors and be like, I can do that. I can do that. And most other animals who just are like, hey, I'm geared for survival, and that is not going to help me survive if I kill my neighbors because the other neighbors are going to come kill me, or it's too risky, I could die. And that humans don't do it that way. They've changed how they operate by breaking those rules, and that's the double-edged sword we've talked about. They think that a lot of humans, because of this, we've developed the sense of we can do anything. And you hear it on the news all the time. We can do anything. We want to be free. It's like, you haven't been free since you were, a microbe,
Exactly.
you know?
If anything,
So
we're
sorry.
more chained now because of all the conditioning and all
Exactly.
the
And
rules that we
and we
have for
don't
ourselves.
right. And we're in these complex societies. We're completely interdependent on everybody. And yet we think we're free because we can have an idea that's completely opposed to the facts and live with it and think we're
Well,
fine.
I'm gonna throw a
You know?
theory out you, a theory
Okay.
out at you. But before I throw that out, let's take a very quick pause to just introduce one of our eco business partners, and then we'll be back. And I'm
Sounds
going to throw a
good.
theory at you. 90% of people promise themselves they're going to read more, but never follow through. Okay, I made that statistic up, but I bet you it's close. In this hyper digital world, mindless scrolling and binge watching TV robs us of our focus, while our books sit on the sidelines, patiently waiting to whisk us away to another world or even to open our minds to fascinating topics like plant intelligence. As a plant inspired mentor and personal evolution coach, I love falling down the rabbit hole of a good book to learn how plants communicate and see how our worlds are so intertwined. Heck, I even like it to just escape from everything for a while and lose myself in another storyland. I love it so much, I created the Plant Wisdom Book Club so we could talk about all these fascinating books. That is why I was so happy to find bookshop.org. They believe local bookstores are essential community hubs that foster culture, curiosity, and a love of reading, and they're committed to helping them thrive. Every purchase on the site financially supports independent bookstores. So, keeping that promise to yourself to read more, click the link in the show notes to help local independent bookstores thrive in the age of e commerce by purchasing a book from bookshop.org. Okay, so here's my theory. I don't know where this is coming from. It's one of those things that just pops up out of the air.
Oh, that's why
So
those are the
as
best.
I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about the whole brain size, because also I've read many. Ooh, I've read too many things about neurobiology. Although I am in no way an expert, I'm still
Nor
like
am I. Nor am I.
neophyte trying to learn.
I
But
have a
I've been
dangerous amount of knowledge.
yeah, exactly. So I've been thinking a lot about this whole find of brain size, which is, it is true, that the size keeps growing in many aspects, especially in the mass that is
Mhm,
there. But we also know that there's a large part of our brain that we don't actually know what the function is, or
mhm,
how functions, or even, let me say it in this way, let me see if I say it right, if it's functioning in coordination with what we think of as our brains today. In other words, there's a part of my brain that either it is so subconscious that I have
mhm.
no clue, or it's doing something that is in no way coordinated to my day-to-day life in any
Mhm,
which way, shape, or
mhm,
form.
mhm,
So my question that I'm trying to think about is, could it be, and really this, you could even just say, you're crazy, don't even think that way. I'm just wondering if, because I was recently reading a paper. If you go back through my plant consciousness
mhm.
commentary
Right,
about 3 papers ago, you'll see that one of the papers that I talked about was one that said part of the problem that we're having is that we're defining nervous system in this based on a human
right.
definition,
I
and
read
that
that.
if we
Yeah.
instead step back out and think
Mhm,
about nervous systems and all these neural networks based on what they do, we would
yeah.
realize that there are way more species that actually have, like
Oh,
plants actually do have a nervous system. It
absolutely.
just happens to be a completely different way that it works.
Right.
But then my
Absolutely.
question is, could it be that plants, because they've been here longer than us, because of their slow evolutionary speed, in some ways, it's almost like we as humans are putting on mass without actually knowing what to do with it, where like we're kind of pushing not necessarily evolution, but more of physical evolution rather than cognitive evolution, let's put it in that way,
Okay.
where instead plants and some other types of animals that are is still evolving way slower. Let's tell reptiles is a great
Mhm,
example, right?
mhm,
Been around for since pretty much the beginning of time,
mhm,
almost since
mhm,
animals first came on. Is it possible that all of these who still have much smaller brains, it's because they're developing kind of as necessary, right?
mhm,
Like it's almost as if humans are putting on mass for what could be, which could be
mhm,
inhibiting us, rather than putting on and developing and evolving out
mhm.
based on actually the conditions that are happening to us. I don't even know if I made
Yeah.
any sense with that.
I think I think you do make sense, and I think what I'm hearing you say is that, um, I think to answer your question is humans have been thinking a longer time before they knew what was really going on, right?
Hmm.
Humans have asked the question why much more earlier, than they knew the answers to, right? That's what religion is. Religion is the early science. Religion is the answer to why are we here? And what does it, how does it work? And why do we die? And why are we here? Well, religion is trying to answer that question. And they do the best they could. They did the best they could. I give an example of Apollo and the sun god. It's like, well, every day the sun came over, so the story of Apollo must be true, right? I mean, that every day the sun goes across, so maybe the chariot is up there and he's going across. But we know that's silly now. We know because we didn't
Hey,
know
hey, 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 don't mess with my divinities, man. Don't mess with my divinities. I still believe
Sorry.
Apollo, I'm still thinking about you.
Okay, Apollo, sorry. Okay. But what I'm saying is we also know that the sun is a star and how
Right,
we rotate around and we do all these things. So
right,
um, the point is that we think faster than the facts caught up to us. We've
right,
had people wondering why these things happen, and um, plants don't do that, and animals don't do that. They live in the world they live in, and they will produce as many offspring with as many variations as they can. And then nature, the environment around them, culls them out, right? Those things that fit in the environment stay, everything else doesn't stay. So, over millions and billions of years, the things that fit are the only things that are there. The things that survive are the only ones that are there. So everything that plants do is because they live in their environment. And you made a point earlier, and I would say, if the meteor hits and kills all the plants, it gets really dark, and the plant needed sunshine to live, the plant will die. The plant will die because it can't adjust. But maybe if it's 6 months of darkness, it might. Now maybe some of its variations won't die and it will come back. But if the conditions change too rapidly for its ability to respond,
of
it will
course.
die.
Right.
And humans have the ability to say, oh man, if the meteor hits, I can go, build a bunker, or I can, go someplace, or they might die too. But humans have a better chance of responding because of that ability to think. And that's why the brain evolved in the way it did, is that ability
See,
to.
I'm going to challenge that one.
But I would say the ability to think is a survival mechanism for humans, which they have used so far to their advantage. But now we're seeing the disadvantage.
Right.
We've got climate change coming. We've got nuclear Armageddon as a possibility. We are the only beings that have all these amazing abilities and the ability to kill ourselves. Whereas animals, they won't kill themselves of their own accord. They will die if the conditions change or if something bad happens, but they won't kill themselves. Humans, we can do that.
Yeah.
And so the question I have is, will humans be able to evolve to a place where they will reduce their danger of killing themselves before we actually kill ourselves?
Well,
And
and
if that happens, the plants and the animals will still be around. They're going to be fine. Life's fine. But and one other point, that those when we talked about the big brain, that 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 evolution, whether it's in dolphins or whales or anything, those evolutions will keep growing. Brains will keep growing if it meets the survival needs of what they have. And this will happen again. There's a book about convergent evolution in which they say that dinosaurs were already building bigger brains and were going to end up being what humans were, but humans did it first before they died out in the meteor hit. That they would have ultimately grown into being the thinking being on Earth rather than primates doing it.
I'm gonna merge together some of the things you said because I think I mean there's so many pieces to it. So many
I know
pieces
it's
that I agree to. I agree in a slightly different configuration.
okay.
And bear with me for a second because
Okay.
I'm kind of almost thinking out loud.
Yeah, and
So
that's great.
and I'm as I'm listening to you talk and I'm thinking about everything, that I've worked on, that I've studied, and all the work that I do with the plants. And I'm thinking about the difference, which we haven't really touched on yet, but I think it works. And I'm using the word think, which I shouldn't use the word think, but it's going to match what I'm about to say, which is the difference between thinking, which in my current vernacular, and especially I'll set the context for what I'm
Okay.
talking about. Thinking is rehashing what I already know.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, like you said, we are
Just
born blank to
mm-hmm.
a certain extent,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
And then we keep getting all these thoughts put into us, right? Our parents teach us this. There's
Mm-hmm.
right and wrong. There's good and bad. There's
Mm-hmm.
here's what works and doesn't work. It's all these thoughts. And
Mm-hmm.
then over the years, as we live, we rehash these thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I am a flexible person without many fears, who allows myself to be vulnerable, I most likely have flexible thinking, in the sense that my thinking can take in additional data and
Mm-hmm.
it could rework, even if that additional data seems out of context with what I know. But if I keep myself in a personal safety, I'm going to use
Mm-hmm.
that. If I feel safe, it doesn't really matter what my environment is like, but I feel safe, then
Mm-hmm.
my thinking remains flexible enough to take in new data and to
Mm-hmm.
mish that together to create new stuff. If
Right.
instead I live in a fear-based model
Mm-hmm.
where vulnerability is not supported, where the ability to use my doubt is never taught, where it is not safe for me to make mistakes, then my thinking becomes very rigid,
Mm-hmm.
very, very conditioned into what is around me, and
Mm-hmm.
I am no longer able to take in new
Right.
data.
Right.
Okay. So that's my context.
Okay.
And I think that part of also the difference between other species and us is the fact that plants and other kinds of animals, again, because we see this even in animals, right? When you see that safety mechanism, take
Mm-hmm.
a dog that's been abused,
Mm-hmm.
right? They react with aggression
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. In other words, you see that same dynamic show up.
Right. Sure.
You see that exact same type of
Sure.
behavior. And where what's missing in all of this is the ability for you to create original thought,
Mm.
which is different to me than thinking. Thinking
Mm.
is I take what exists
Mm-hmm.
and I rehash it.
Mm-hmm.
And original thought is I create something completely new and unexpected.
Mm. Mm.
And I feel like in some ways our brains, because are so susceptible to that fear model,
Mm-hmm.
is they're so susceptible. Like that's one of the limitations of the brain, is that it almost also enhances this fear model oftentimes,
Mm-hmm.
that creates that rigidity that then inhibits us from creating original thought. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
use the context of what triggered this when you were saying the whole, if it's 6 months of dark, plants are going to die. Yes, and it is true that most likely the plants that are currently here are going to die.
Right.
But if I know plants
Mm-hmm.
in that dying process,
Mm-hmm.
right, over the course of those months, because the plants are going to be feverishly trying to find alternative ways to nourish themselves that they might
Absolutely.
not accomplish in
Right.
this lifetime,
Right.
but they will throw it into the seeds over and over
Mm-hmm.
again, all these
Right.
different variations, like you
Right.
said.
You're right.
And by the time that the plant dies, they
Mm-hmm.
would have in some ways left something behind
Right.
that
Right.
allowed it to be mixed with something else that's
Mm-hmm.
behind
Mm-hmm.
to eventually get nourishment from, because
Mm-hmm.
it just so happened that the last episode of the podcast was all about scototropism, which
Oh,
is the plants growing towards the dark.
right.
That's why you
Right.
triggered it.
Right.
So
Right.
I
Right.
had
Right.
just
Right.
done a bunch of study
Oh,
on the
okay.
fact that
Okay.
there
Okay.
are plants that
Mhm.
grow towards darkness before
Mhm.
they ever grow towards
Right.
light.
Right.
So
I
they get
remember
nourished
I
by
watched
other
that one.
pieces.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the point I was trying to make is that, kind of going back to why we called this episode, the idea of how brains can actually limit us. I'm wondering if part of this, everything that we're talking about is, and your theories, which I agree with you, it's like we're not working anymore like natural
Mhm.
systems, and therefore our thoughts are actually which are not thoughts, our thinking is
Mhm.
actually inhibiting us
Mhm.
because our brains are almost passing everything first
Mhm.
through a fear filter.
Yeah.
And so
I think
that
our
fear
brains are
filter,
a filter. I think that is a definite thing. Um,
yeah,
and I think what you say is the way I put it is that nature tries everything.
exactly,
Everything. They just try everything. And it's done that since the beginning of time, since a big bang. Energy blows together and makes, stuff, and then that stuff blows together to make stuff or whatever. That is the story of how we exist in this universe.
right,
Things try, and life just tries everything. And you're right. And it's the plant in its dying will do everything it can to survive, and it will just try everything that nature will allow it, the conditions will allow it to do. It will
right.
just try everything it can.
And
And
probably some things that the conditions don't allow, but it's gonna fricking
and
try
then
it
if the
anyway.
conditions don't allow it, then it won't survive.
Exactly.
And the whole point is that there's always more efforts. I don't like to say trials like as a trial and error, but there will always be more trials than successes,
Yeah,
always. And
always.
as long as there's one or two successes, it goes on. And what
Exactly.
we see now are just multiple successes over time. And what I think your point is that plants are better at surviving um, in their conditions than animals and humans, because our conditions are we have more resources we have more things we need. It gets more um animals are I don't mean that as a
No, no,
disrespect. I'm
I'm
just
listening.
saying
I'm just
that,
thinking that they're more apt to trials. I think that that trials that you
right,
just
well,
said
they
is a
they
great
have
reason.
more. I think that they would have more trials, and
That's my point. Yeah, I
yeah,
agree,
and the
agree
more
completely.
complex, being you have, whether it's a tiger or a human, anytime you have a variation, the whole system has to work. A tiger has 300 trillion cells that all have to work together with a variation. Ugh. Sometimes those variations show up in humans as cancer. When we try a variation, our 35 trillion cells have to work together. Plants have a much um, simpler system where changes might be easier to make. That's why I think there's so many plants in the world.
I
You
don't know if
know,
that's actually true, but I can see where you're going with it because the plant genome is actually more complex than the human genome.
it's more
So
complex, but it does very straightforward things. I think the human genome is maybe less complex, but it does a lot of balancing. I mean, there's a lot of little things have to go right in a row. But the plants, they may have more diversity, but they do shorter trips down the complexity lane. Does that make
yeah,
sense?
I get what you're saying. I still always wonder, and maybe this is just me and my own biases, because we all have our
Mhm.
biases, and I have my
Mhm.
biases. I always wonder. So in the like you said, there's so many species of plants. There's so many species, even if you're talking about tigers, how many
Right.
species of tigers are
Right.
there? There are tons
Mhm.
of them, right? There's
Mhm.
so many. And yet we right now only have one species of human.
Mhm.
And the Homo species is only one species, sapiens, and
Mhm.
everything else has died out.
Mhm.
Everything else is gone. And I wonder, going back to this lovely fear based brain of ours, oftentimes, that is it really that we are not capable of some of these things and some of these evolutive steps that we're talking about? Or is it, if you think about even the way we talk and the way we
Mhm.
act, going back to your original concept of like the human idea is that anything that doesn't look like what I look like right now is wrong. Any anomaly is bad. There
Mhm.
are only a few types of things like genius intelligence or certain types of stuff. But if I'm born with six fingers,
Mhm.
every doctor is, and my parents are trying to figure out how to go back to five. The
Right.
concept that six fingers is actually an evolution and that could be more adapt to our
Mhm.
current society or
Mhm.
our current environment. Let's not talk about
Mhm.
society, environment for a second.
Mhm.
Our societal norms do not allow us to
Mhm.
really evolve in tune with our environment.
Right.
And I'm wondering if
Right.
where
Agree
we
with that.
have, like you said, all these complexities, I wonder if it's because we've forced ourselves, that little fear filter
Mhm.
has forced us to not evolve in harmony with our environments, to
Mhm.
continuously build these bridges outside of ourselves, these crutches, which is
Mhm.
technology, which is all of this. It's kind of like that meme that says, oh, if only I could find technology that allows me to sequester carbon at such and such a rate. And it's
Mhm.
like, trees, but we want to build it with devices.
Right.
And I wonder if really there's a big piece of this that our brains are actually not as complex as we think of it, but in some ways atrophied, that we haven't allowed ourselves
Mm.
to develop all of the variations that humans should have in order. Yeah, sure, we have different colored hair and we have
Mhm.
different colored eyes, very minute kind of variations that are attuned to our local environment,
Mhm.
like blondes
Mhm.
versus dark skin versus, but even that we tried to demonize, right? Dark
Right.
skin that was more attuned to the harsh sun, we
Mhm.
tried to make them slaves. And we
Mm.
did make, not tried to,
Right, right,
we
right,
made slaves.
right.
We put all these negative connotations around it.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if there are many, many more things like having four legs or developing a second nose or,
Mhm.
having other arms, things that, even Siamese twins for, all
Mhm.
these different aspects. I still wonder if there is some aspect of all of this neurodivergence. I talk about that
Mhm.
all the time,
Mhm.
is really the fact that the human brain has now limited our development because the societal rules say this is right and this is wrong, and it passes through that little fear filter that does
Mhm.
not allow us to evolve into who we should be, and that we
Mhm.
would have so many more homo species and
Mhm.
so many more adaptations that would actually allow us to really evolve even beyond plants and other kinds of animals in a way that is more attuned to our environment. I don't know.
And what
Does that
no,
make
what
sense?
I think is you're about several generations ahead of where we are as people. I think what is human, you're right. We're the only species right now. And I think we've made kind of a hash of it. We're not, but we've only been writing and oral traditions and everything for maybe 10,000 years at the
Mm,
most. That is a blink of an eye in time. And not only that, but we're like the first ones who've really done this. And I think that we probably aren't going to be the last, but we may not survive because the first the first things that do things don't always do it
right.
well. They I make a point in my book about the prokaryotes, the little single-celled, very jumbled up. The first life formed. They were just a mishmash of stuff, but they survived and they made it. It took a couple billion years for those prokaryotes to organize into eukaryotes, to have little organelles and have very efficient functioning. Well, we're prokaryotes of the human species.
Yep.
We're probably going to, if we survive, we are probably going to create better and better versions of, if we can figure out how to expand our brains, develop our thinking beyond, to develop our capabilities beyond our limiting ways we do it now. This is our first try. We've
Right.
done pretty amazing things and we've done some pretty weird things. And like you said, there's a lot of things that filter us and keep us from being more.
Right.
And maybe the next generation will evolve to do that, or maybe not. Maybe we'll just be one of those that fail, and maybe it's the octopus generation that'll evolve into better beings than we are. I don't know that, but I think what you're saying is, I would say we're the first try at this, and because we can think, we can not only limit ourselves, but we can expand our thinking. And I look at AI a little bit like this. It's very interesting. What AI is doing is making all thinking more available to people.
Mhm.
And now, I don't know whether it can turn over to make original thought, like you saying, which is not really original. It's more put together in a different way because nothing's really original. We've all come from someplace else, right? But but it's original if it's not been put together that way. So
Right.
my book has no original ideas in it, but the synthesis of the book, of the idea, is new. The synthesis, the putting together of those ideas are new. And what you're saying is humans need to put together these ideas, or put together our skills, our ability to think in a different way, to become better, more sustainable humans, right?
Yeah, and I think we're getting closer
Yeah.
in some ways. I think the move towards, for example, all of our gender conversations that are
Hmm.
happening right now, I think
Hmm.
all the neurodivergence
Hmm.
acceptance that's starting to happen in the world, like these types of pieces, I think are taking us, cognitively speaking, into new directions that are
Hmm.
going to allow the brain
Right.
to develop in a completely different way
Right.
that I think hopefully will, if we do it right, again, create more safety for more trials and for
Right.
more expansion into different directions. And my hope this is my hope,
Mhm.
is that as we move into more of those types of thinking, we
Mhm.
will then allow our bodies to adapt, because I
Right.
think that that's the only way that we're going to survive as
Right.
the climate continues to change. Because our bodies need, like you said, of the whole plant having to survive 6 months without light,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? Which we know that they can do and they have learned to do, because you go to places like Finland and there are
Mhm.
trees, even though,
Mhm.
or north, there
Right.
are areas
Mhm.
where it happens. And so, but that only comes from a different expanse, a different thought process that we
Right.
today are not able to
Right.
do. And so I think that we're moving, I think the whole quest to be more of a more accepting society, to have societies that, like you said, send the signal, and the signal doesn't come back and says, no, you're wrong, screw off, but
Right.
instead says, oh, there's something going wrong, or this is different, let's go investigate or
Mhm.
help or whatever, all of
Mhm.
these types of things, I think will allow that eventually our bodies will be able to
Right.
also kind of move that fear filter out of the
Right.
way and say, all right, let's develop something different. Let's
Right.
change what's going on. And this will be always more attuned, because
Mhm.
to what is happening in society,
Right.
like to what is happening environmentally, excuse me.
Right.
So I do think that that's the path forward.
Well, and the way I approach that in my book is, I agree with you, is my approach was to go back to nature and say, how does nature collaborate? How does nature coordinate? And it comes down to one sentence. For people, people should be able to do whatever they want as long as they don't harm another or the society or the world in which they live. So that means that if you take a look at how you should make decisions, what it did was it calmed me down,
Mm.
because I can look at the world like nature does and decide how to solve a problem or how to look at a problem. For instance, gender, you gender choice. It's like, boy, nature does all. First of all, nature does all kinds of things. So
Please,
nature's
there's
going to do
so
all kinds of things. Second, it doesn't hurt anybody. So
many.
go for it. Gay marriage, same thing. That doesn't hurt anybody. Go for it.
Exactly.
But guns do hurt people. So they need to be regulated. So I can make a very simple rule that says anytime a human behavior is going to harm another behavior, it gets regulated in some way, whether it's a coordinating a government function. The coordinating factor in your family is your parents. The coordinating function in a business is the CEO or the management. Anytime those people are required to make sure that they do no harm, that their functionaries underneath them do no harm. And that's the way nature works. In your body, those 35 trillion cells work together. They do not compete. And they all work together to keep you as the unit alive and to keep each other alive. Well, if our societies ran that way, we would make many different decisions. We would take private money out of elections and government, because what that money does is it allows the coordinators to make decisions for the benefit of those private money people, not for the good of the people. And so that has to be removed. That has to be a law that says, nope, we can't do that, because that's going to harm the good of the people. That's not our goal. And taxation is the same way. um, Taxation is nourishment. In our body, your mouth and your stomach take in the food, and everybody else gets fed. Everybody, the whole body needs to get fed in order for the body to survive. But our societies don't work that way, and they should work that way, at least for healthcare and affordable rent and food and education. Those things are basic to making sure a person creates the best ideas they can and become a member of the full society. But we don't do that. So that's what the book is a lot about. It takes this one sentence that says, this is how bodies work. You get to do what you want, but you can't harm anybody. And humans have the do what you want as the bigger thing, and the oh, don't harm anybody as the littler thing. And
Right.
it needs to be the other way around, you know. So that's how I see. If and what I want is for you and people like you who are study plants. Plants don't harm anybody. I mean, the biggest thing they do is sometimes they put out a poison to say, don't grow too close to me because you're not going to make it. Neither of us are going to make it, right? But other than that, plants are the most peaceful things on earth. They don't harm anybody, except some in self-defense, right? But So that knowledge of how to be a plant and not be limited is a very good lesson for us to learn as to bring forward. And I love what you're doing, because I can start to see how we can use plants as an example, not just animals and cells, but plants as an example of how to make better decisions and be better people and make a better world.
I love it. I love it. Sounds great. I was going to ask you for final thoughts, but I think you just gave us your final thoughts, and I think that's
There
awesome.
I was.
So tell everybody the name of the book and when it's coming out and where they can find it.
Okay, it's called The Human Idea, Earth's New Ecosystem, Earth's Newest Ecosystem. Sorry about that. And it's coming out everywhere. It'll be on Amazon, but it'll be everywhere. It should be in bookstores, or I've got it to where libraries can order it, but I don't know when that will actually happen.
Right.
But you can find it on any kind of ebook platform or any kind of basic bookstore. You can order it there. It comes out November 19th. I just got heard that the final printed version is in the mail to me, so I get to look at that. So it's
Yay.
pretty exciting. Yeah, and mostly I want to say thank you for giving me this chance to think about. I hadn't really thought about plants a lot, and I see how rich this area of thinking is, for making the world a better place. And I think what you're doing is really amazing, and has a very important place in our conversations in the world.
Aw, thank you. And I love what you're doing too. I'm looking forward to, I have a copy of the book. I'm excited to get
Yay.
my hands into it more.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking forward to everybody being able to get the book. I will make sure that when it comes out, we'll also add it. Hopefully it'll show up on bookshop.org, which
Yeah.
we have a bookstore for.
Oh,
So
good.
I will
Oh,
make
good.
sure that I add it in there so that people
Okay.
can find it there.
Yeah, I love your
And
recommendations. I just got this one came up today. I
oh,
got it in the
yay,
mail
that's the
today.
newest book.
Yeah,
That
I'm
is the newest book
excited.
of our Plant Wisdom book club. So
Yeah,
yes,
I saw that. I was like,
ways of
yes.
being. I'm excited about this. I'm
Yeah.
really enjoying reading that book.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Well, I think
thank
there's a big movement coming, that where people are starting to really put together that we need to coexist, and that we need to turn off some of our freedom talk, and we
right,
need to
exactly.
coexist. So,
Fantastic. Thank you again, Anne, and thank you to everybody who is here all the way to the end. Remember, if you enjoyed this conversation and you want more of them, please make sure you make a comment, you share it, everything that goes to helping this message reach a wider audience.
that would
So
be great.
that's it for this episode. Another episode. I can't believe it. We're at episode 79.
Wow,
And
that's
so
fantastic.
so beautiful. So thank you again, Anne. And remember, everyone, resist the urge to hold back your emerging green brilliance. This is me, Tigria Gardenia. I'm out. Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. Intro and outro music by Steve Shuley and Poinsettia from The Singing Life of Plants. So join me, Tigria Gardenia, and my plant collaborators next time on ReConnect with Plant Wisdom. Speak soon.